Welcome to the Ransom Church. We're excited to have you here with us. Whether you are ready or not, Advent is upon us. The Advent season starts next week, and we'll be moving towards Christmas and going through our visitation series all the way up through the new year. And so you'll want to join us for that, particularly Christmas Eve. And so they're going to put the Christmas Eve schedule of services at our different campuses up on the screens for you, and you can check those out. You'll notice Thursday night is our option for those who need to travel. That is at West Campus only, and then you'll see the rest of the services there. And hopefully one of those works for you, and you might want to think about getting tickets. You can get those through our app. You can get those on our website, and if you are a little less tech savvy, a little tech challenge, stop by the Info Hub on your way out of your campus, and you can, we'll meet you there, and we'll help you get signed up for tickets, and be considering tickets for those you might want to come with us. Obviously, those tickets are free. They just help us kind of plan on who's going to what service so that we make sure we have seats for everyone and don't have to turn anyone away. Well, today's message is not part of a series. Like I said, next week we'll launch into our Advent series, but this week I get to talk about whatever I want. So this could get interesting. No, I want to start today with a story, with an old fable, really. It's been passed down for generations about an elderly man traveling with a young boy and his donkey. Maybe you've heard the story. The young man came to a village, and as he walked through the village, the man was leading the donkey, and the boy was following behind. And the townspeople said, "You're a fool for not riding on the donkey." So to please them, he climbed up on the animal's back. The next village, the people said that the man was cruel to let a child walk while he enjoyed the ride. So to please them, he got off and he put the boy on the donkey. The third village that they came to accused the child of being lazy, and it suggested that they should both ride the donkey. So to please them, he climbed on the donkey as well. The fourth village they came to, the people were indignant at the cruelty that the donkey had to carry both the man and the child. So to please the people, they both got off the donkey. The last time the man was seen, he was carrying the donkey down the road. So I don't know what happened after that. But now, why do I share that with you? Only to set up the topic that today we're going to talk about a donkey. So that kind of sets. It was either that or a Shrek clip, so I don't know. But turn to Luke chapter 10, if you will. If you're using one of our Bibles, we'll be on page 623. If you didn't bring a Bible, you can raise your hand. The ushers will bring you one. You can follow along. If you don't own a Bible, please raise your hand. We want to give you one as a gift and make sure that you have God's Word. You also could just download our app if you haven't already, and under the Sunday Services tab, all our notes are there as well. Now, as you turn to Luke chapter 10, if you've been attending for a while, you may realize, wait a minute, I know that story. In fact, I'm pretty sure that we preached on that story pretty recently. And you're right, we did. And apparently we're supposed to spend quite a bit of time this year in the Good Samaritan. And so we're going to be hitting this story once again. This is one of Jesus' most well-known parables. In fact, it's a story that's so well-known, both inside and outside the church, that it's actually become an idiom for sacrificial kindness. When people go out of their way to be helpful, you'll hear people say, "Well, wow, they're such good Samaritans," and this term is just a common term, even if we don't understand where it came from. Now, in some ways, the familiarity with the story is great, but in other ways, that being that familiar with the story can be dangerous, because when you're that familiar with something, you think you have it all down. You think you've heard it. It's easy to check out and go, I heard this message this year. I'm just going to kind of go into my nothing box and mentally check out for the rest of the service. I would encourage you not to do that, because there may be some things in the story that are yet to be revealed to you. For instance, how many knew there was a donkey in that story? A lot of people don't, and so we're going to talk about that donkey in a little bit. But for most people, we know that this parable, this story is about serving others, and that's true. But what I want you to get out of this today is that serving others is about more than just external action. It's more than just what you do. It's also about an internal disposition of your heart. Let me put that in Ransom terms. There's a difference between serving and serving free of yourself. There's a difference between serving and serving free of yourself. So with that in mind, let's jump in. Luke chapter 10, starting with verse 25. It says, "One day an expert in religious law stood up to test Jesus by asking him this question. 'Teacher, what should I do to inherit eternal life?' Jesus replied, 'What does the law of Moses say? How do you read it?' The man answered, 'You must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your strength, and all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself.' 'Right,' Jesus told him, 'do this and you will live.' The man wanted to justify his actions, so he asked Jesus, 'And who's my neighbor?' That gives us a setup for the story. Jesus engages this expert in the religious law. The expert asks a common question, a question that everybody knew the answer to, that he knew the answer to. And it happens when Jesus is teaching. Everybody's seated, Jesus is teaching, and all of a sudden this guy stands up in the middle of Jesus teaching, and so they've got this audience of onlookers as he has this dialogue with Jesus, and he says, hey, what do I got to do to inherit eternal life? Jesus turns the question back on him, and the man's a Jewish leader, a Jewish lawyer, and so Jesus refers him to the law. He says, what does the law of Moses say? What are the first 5 books of the Bible, the Torah, what do they say? And the man answers as you would expect. Love God and love your neighbor. That's what it says. Jesus' response is this: do this and you will live. Now, what you need to understand is when Jesus said that, he meant it as a challenge. He wasn't saying, yeah, you should actually do that, because the reality is no one can perfectly obey the law. No one can perfectly love God and love others. Anybody here perfect? Yeah, I didn't think so. We don't have this down, okay? And so Jesus, it's as if Jesus is saying, oh, you're gonna obey the law perfectly? Good luck with that. Jesus isn't commending legalism here. He's actually showing, hey, it's pointless to try to be, no one can ever be perfect. And yet this lawyer responds as if he's going to try. He's going to be the one guy who gets this right. He says in verse 29, the man wanted to justify his actions, so he asked Jesus, well, who's my neighbor? And you might say, justify what actions? The answer is his entire life. This guy has lived to try to do it all on his own strength his entire life. For this lawyer, this religious leader, and I would argue for a lot of Christians, this idea of love God with your heart, soul, mind, strength, love your neighbor as yourself, it ceased to be a calling a long time ago, and now it's just a checklist. Did I do all the right things? Have I been good enough? Well, this is what the lawyer should have said. He probably should have said something like, you're right, Jesus, I can't love perfectly. Nobody can. I mean, I try, but it's impossible. I can't love God perfectly. I've tried that. I don't do very well. I can't love other people perfectly. Have you met Bob? I mean, who could love Bob? I can't love Bob perfectly. I'm imperfect, Jesus. My ability to love is imperfect, but you know what? I'm going to do my best. I'm going to do my best to love you with all my heart. I'm going to do my best to love my neighbor as myself, and I'm just going to pray that your grace fills in all the gaps, because I just can't be perfect. That's probably what he should have said. Instead, what he said is, I got this. Who's my neighbor? Point me the direction. This guy drowns out the fire of conviction with the water of self-righteous pride. He wanted to justify himself, to justify what he had done, to excuse what he hadn't done, and to appear to everybody as if he was righteous, which we all know he's not. And because he's so off course, Jesus does what he often does. Instead of just giving a straight answer, he answers through story. Let's pick it up, verse 30. So Jesus replied with a story. A Jewish man was traveling from Jerusalem down to Jericho, and he was attacked by bandits. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him up, and left him half dead beside the road. Now, I'm pretty visual, so let me paint the picture for you. From Jerusalem to Jericho is about 17 miles, and it says that he went down to Jericho because it's literally downhill. In fact, you go from about 2,500 feet above sea level to about 800 feet below sea level, so a drop of about 3,300 feet in 17 miles. It's rocky. It's in the middle of desert country. There's all kinds of caves and outcroppings in the rock. It's an easy, common place for robbers to hide in the area. There's actually an area called the Pass of Adumim, which means bloody pass. And that today, this day of the story, it lived up to its name as our traveler is beaten and he's left for dead on a road that, honestly, they were leaving him for dead because it might have been hours before anybody came. But as it turned out, somebody did come. And we'll pick it up, verse 31. By chance, a priest came along, but when he saw the man lying there, he crossed the other side of the road and passed him by. A temple assistant walked over and looked at him lying there, but he also passed by on the other side. Let me ask you a question. Have you ever found a good reason to not do a good deed? You ever found a legitimate excuse to not care for someone, to not go out of your way? I've been the king of this at times. I'm not going to lie. You see somebody, you go, well, I would give that guy money, but I don't know what he's going to spend it on. How do I know he's, not going to buy booze or drugs or something? I can't give him any money. Oh, I'd help that person out, but I don't want to enable them. I don't want to cause them to feel entitled. We all have reasons for not serving, reasons for not meeting needs and not reaching out and giving to people in need. And can I be honest? A lot of them are legit. Nothing will make you more cynical than giving generously and then realizing you've been taken advantage of. And so I get it. I get the cynicism around helping others and things like that. But these two religious leaders, they tend to get a bad rap. We read this story And we're like, these are the bad guys. These guys were terrible. And we go, how could they just walk past a guy who was dying? But let's be honest with ourselves, can't we? I think some of us give the same excuses these two give all of the time to get out of serving those around us, to get out of serving in our local church. And there are people dying and going to hell all around us, and we tend to walk right by them. We give the same excuses. Let me show you what I mean. One of their excuses was defilement. Defilement. One of the reasons these guys passed by is it could have disqualified them from temple service. If they would have reached out to this guy and he would have been dead, that would have made them unclean. And this was their job, this was their career. Helping this guy could actually threaten their well-being. That's like a legitimate excuse. And they had places to go, they had people to minister to. They couldn't help this guy, which sounds ridiculous to our ears, but this is just like not reaching out to unbelievers, neighbors, friends, coworkers, because you're worried that their sinfulness might rub off on you. I mean, if you're a Christian in the room, ask yourself this question. How many non-Christian friends do I have? I'm not talking non-Christians you interact with or but I'm talking people who are not a believer and they are your friend and you're doing life. How many non-Christian friends do you have? Or are we insulating and isolating ourselves from the rest of the world? Another excuse people give is danger. And this was a pretty dangerous stretch of road, as I mentioned, and people would avoid it if at all possible. In fact, if the priest and the Levite had more time or had more money, if they hadn't been in such a hurry, it was the most direct route. And if they hadn't been in such a hurry, they might have taken a different route. And so they're trying to get out of there as fast as possible before they, get donkey jacked or something. And here's the reality. Serving people always comes at a risk. You know that? Serving people always comes at a risk. You don't believe me? Ask anybody who's involved with Safe Families for Children. This is one ministry in our church. I could talk about any of them, but in this particular one, there's a huge risk in opening your home to children, to be in your home while a parent gets the help that they need in whatever situation in life that they're in. There's a huge risk in opening your heart to those kiddos. And there's a huge risk in opening your heart as a coach. To coach the parent. There's a huge risk as a parent in allowing people to care for your kids while you get the help you need. Can you imagine the vulnerability that takes? You can't do Safe Families for Children without getting messy. And this is just the nature of serving free of self. There is an inherent danger that exists in serving free of self. And for many people, this is why they don't get involved in serving, because they're just unwilling to take that risk. Well, I don't have time to get messy. That could be a legitimate excuse. It could be dangerous. It's not a good excuse, but it's legitimate. Another excuse that they give is delay. These guys were on a schedule. They're going somewhere, and I can relate. You ever notice how inconvenient serving is? It never happens when you've got time. It never goes as smooth as you think. It always takes longer than you think, and you're juggling work and school and home and kids and church and all this stuff, and it feels like you're just racing your way through every day, and we can't even catch up on our own lives, much less hit the pause button and help someone else. This is actually the number one excuse people give for not serving, whether that be serving in a ministry in their community, serving in a ministry at their church, ministering to their neighbors, just loving on them, getting to know them. Everybody's got good intentions. Everybody says, I really got to get to know my neighbors. I really want to start serving somewhere. I want to do something. I want to. There's just no time. And we tell ourselves that's a legitimate excuse as if everybody else isn't busy too. We say, I just don't have time. And perhaps in the next season, things will settle down. Has anybody found that settle down season yet? If you do, please let me know how to find it. But in the meantime, we're all busy. And those who choose to serve do so in the midst of their busyness. Listen, these were all logical reasons not to serve, and we could blast these two guys for not doing anything and leaving this man for dead. But if we're honest, we can also identify with their choices. It's funny how two people who represent God could justify overlooking a dying man on the side of the road, and yet these are the same excuses we give for not getting involved in ministry. And we walk by people who are dying and going to hell every single day, and we cross the road and walk on by. So let's jump in and meet our final character, verse 33. Then a despised Samaritan came along, and when he saw the man, he felt compassion for him. Going over to him, the Samaritan soothed his wounds with olive oil and wine and bandaged them. Then he put the man on his own donkey and took him to an inn where he took care of him. The next day, he handed the innkeeper 2 silver coins, telling him, "Take care of this man. If his bill runs higher than this, I'll pay you the next time I'm here." And with this, Jesus blew up their reality. Because the next guy that comes down the road, he's not a religious leader. He's not even involved, a member of the local synagogue. He's a total outsider. He's likely not a believer, and he's hated. As we've talked about in lots of messages, Jews and Samaritans hated each other. It's a feud going back to 722 BC and a feud that is honestly still going on today between the Israelites and the Palestinians. Okay? Now today, when we hear the word Samaritan, our view has changed because we know this story. You know, my mom, who's got Alzheimer's, is in a nursing home known as Good Samaritan Village. I mean, that's the name of the place. You know, Franklin Graham and his relief ministry is known as Samaritan's Purse. We hear this word. It's a beautiful word to our ears. That's not what it meant then. That was not the perspective of the people at the time. They hated Samaritans. And we could do a whole sermon series on that alone. And if you want to go hear Phil Wiseman's message on that from a few weeks back, he really jumps into that. But we're not going to camp there because I want to get to our donkey. So here we go. Did you notice him? He's in verse 34. Then he put the man on his own donkey, took him to an inn where he took care of him. You don't seem excited. I'm going to read that again. Then he put the man on his own donkey and took him to an inn where he took care of him. Yeah. Now, let me tell you why that's amazing. What does it mean about the guy? Not a trick question. If he put the man on his own donkey, what does it mean? Yeah, it means he got off his donkey. Okay? This man had all the same excuses everybody else did. He was busy. He was on his way somewhere. The danger of the road was still just as real to him. But this despised Samaritan sees a Jewish man, a man who probably would have treated him like an outcast if he was conscious. And he set aside his schedule, and he set aside his convenience, and he got off his donkey, and he got down on his knees, and he served the brokenness before him. Please hear me, church, because this is where it gets really, really personal. Some of you serve all the time. You serve in the community. You serve in ministries in the church. You serve your neighbor. You love your neighbors. You are the Good Samaritan, and for that I thank you. For the rest of you who are still making excuses why you are too busy to serve, why you can't do what God is calling you to do, please hear me when I say this. I think it's about time you get off your donkey and serve. Yep, I went there. And I'm not trying to be crude. Listen, there's always an excuse in life to just keep riding. There's always you'll always be able to justify doing nothing. It's so easy to justify doing nothing. And when you walk by needs in our community, when you choose to skip serving in your city, when you choose to opt out of serving in your local church, you are walking by people who are hurting and they're dying in their sins, and you're just leaving it for the next guy, assuming that a good Samaritan will come along behind you. But there are far more needs than there are servants to fill them. Simply because most people won't get off their donkey and serve. They won't take up the mantle of service. This is my plea. Somebody is dying for you to serve. But you got to be willing to get in the game and to start living a life of service. And if that's going to happen, it is going to take a fundamental shift in how you think, how you approach life, how you view people, what you think it means to be part of the body of Christ. And it's not going to be convenient, and it's going to mess up your schedule, and it won't work with what's convenient for your family and your timetable, and you should do it anyway. Because it's never been about you. So let me give you some examples of what that means. Number one, to serve the need, we must first see the need. It says, then a despised Samaritan came along, and when he saw the man, and you might be thinking, that's pretty obvious. Even the religious leader, I mean, these guys saw the guy too. I would argue the religious leaders saw him, but they didn't see him, if you know what I mean. Yes, they physically saw him lying there, but they saw a problem. They saw an inconvenience. They didn't see a human being. Only the Samaritan acknowledged the situation. Before we can meet the needs that are all around us, we have to see the needs that are all around us. And our community is full of needs. Our church is full of needs that people just by and large aren't seeing. And by the way, we often make that about finances. It's not about finances. There are some people here who are going, well, I'm the person in need. simply because you're struggling financially, but often our own need is what blinds us from the needs that we could serve right around us. The neighbor whose marriage is falling apart, and they just need somebody to talk to. The coworker who's depressed and lonely. The ministry in town that's desperate for volunteers. The ministries here at Ransom Church where there are huge gaps that need to be filled. The Good Samaritan saw the wounded man. And I wonder if there are needs that are right around us that we're just not even looking, we're not even seeing. Jesus warns us in John 4:35, he says, "But I say to you, wake up and look around. The fields are already ripe for harvest." Do we have eyes to see the needs around us? We have to be able to get out of our bubble and look past our own private little lives and see the reality that we are living in a world that is dying. We have a lost humanity that desperately needs Jesus. And the Samaritan is not too preoccupied with his own journey to be able to see the hurt that's right in front of him. What are the needs that are right in front of you that you walk by every day? To serve those needs, you first have to see them. And then second, to serve, we must feel compassion. Verse 33, a despised man came along. When he saw the man, he felt compassion for him. You know what the definition of compassion is? It's a feeling of deep sympathy or sorrow for another. Here's the key: accompanied by a desire to alleviate that suffering. It's the second part that we're missing. It's the second part that's so critical. This isn't just feeling bad about something, it's feeling bad enough to do something about it. Some people see suffering, they don't even feel bad about it. But for the most of us, I think we empathize well. We hear about things that are going on, we hear about bad situations, and our heart breaks and go, oh, that's just so terrible. But typically that's where it ends. The difference between the priest and the Levite and this Samaritan that we now call the Good Samaritan, the reason that this is the story of the Good Samaritan, not the good priest and the good Levite, is because everybody kind of felt something, but the Samaritan did something. He had compassion. He lived it out. It says in verse 34, going over to him, the Samaritan soothed his wounds with olive oil and wine and bandaged them. In other words, compassion moved the Samaritan to action. He saw the suffering of the man, even though he had the same list of excuses. Compassion overruled caution. And instead of focusing on himself and his needs and his comfort and his schedule, he focused on the suffering of another. When we read about Jesus' ministry, we see this all the time. He did things for people because he was moved with compassion. He couldn't help himself. Mark 6 describes it this way. It says, Jesus had compassion on people because they were like sheep without a shepherd. He couldn't help but be moved with compassion. Well, this Samaritan, who may not even be a believer, models Jesus' compassion well. Wine would have been used for cleaning his wounds, sort of like an antiseptic or an alcohol swab. Olive oil would have eased the man's pain. Neither of those are free, by the way. They're costly. I think God wants to use us to ease the pain of the world, but it starts with a compassionate heart. The question is, how's your heart? How many times have we been headed somewhere? I mean, maybe even we're running late for church. Anybody ran late for church? I won't make you raise your hand. You ever been running late for church? You see someone in need and you drive on by and you don't stop and help because you're worried about being late for church? I mean, does that seem weird to anybody? Anybody ever see someone in need and you don't stop by and help because you don't want to be late for serving? Like, that's crazy. This is where the Samaritan made the difference. This is where he saw the need and he had compassion, but first he had to be willing to get off his donkey. And the Samaritan didn't stop there either. It says in number 3, to serve, we must go the extra mile. And he certainly did that. Verse 34 says, then he put the man on his own donkey and took him to an inn where he took care of him. The next day he handed the innkeeper 2 silver coins, telling him, take care of this man. If his bill runs higher than this, I'll pay you the next time I'm here. So often we're guilty of trying to fit serving into our schedule. It doesn't work. Serving interrupts. This goes beyond a small inconvenience. He put the guy on his donkey, which means he walked. He took him to a hotel. He nursed him overnight. He paid for the room for an extended stay. 2 silver coins would be equal to 2 days' wages, which would have probably at that time paid for about 2 months in this inn. And not only that, he gave the guy his credit card number, Hey, if it runs higher, just send me the bill. This is so far above and beyond the way that we look at serving. At Ransom Church, one of our core values is we want to help people learn to serve free of self. There is a difference between serving and serving free of self. We have people all the time step up and they're willing to serve, but they don't actually set their agenda aside in order to do it. They just try to add it to what they're already doing. And so they serve for a while and they get tired of it, or they get overwhelmed and they say, well, I can't serve anymore. It's too much of a strain on my life. I'm feeling really, really overwhelmed. And I think to myself, really, in all of your life, serving an hour on Sunday morning is what's got you feeling overwhelmed? And I think to myself, if you serve with a serving team on a month and off a month, that means if you never miss, which doesn't happen, by the way, but if you never miss, that means you will have, at the end of the year, you will have served 24 to 26 hours that year. If that's killing you, let's sit down and have a conversation about what's weighing down your soul that 26 hours of service a year has you overwhelmed. Something bigger is going on. There's a difference between serving and serving free of self. And the model of this is Jesus. He was the key model to go the extra mile. His service, by the way, led him to the cross for you and for me. I'm pretty sure that was inconvenient. And then Paul reminds us in Philippians chapter 2, he says, your attitude is supposed to be same as this guy Jesus, who didn't consider equality with God something to be grasped, but laid himself down, made himself humbled himself to become nothing, even unto death on a cross. And that's to be your attitude. And 26 hours a year is too much. There's an old Danish proverb that puts it well. What you are is God's gift to you. What you do with yourself is your gift to God. That was a lesson that day. And so in follow-up to his story, Jesus asked this. He says, now which of these 3 would you say was a neighbor to the man who was attacked by bandits? You want to know what a neighbor is? Who would you say is a neighbor? Jesus asked. The man replied, the one who showed him mercy. And that's when Jesus was serious and he said, yes, now go and do the same. Be a neighbor. I'm going to turn it over to the campus pastors to wrap up, but let me leave you with a thought. Jesus changed the question completely. The man says, well, who's my neighbor? And what Jesus essentially says is, you're asking the wrong question. The question is, who's my neighbor? The question is, to whom am I being a neighbor? There's no shortage in the world of people in need. The Christian life isn't something that we do on Sunday. It should be on display for the world to see in everything we do all the time. It should be lived with eyes wide open. It should be marked with compassion. It should be willing to go the extra mile.